you didn't get canned for passing dirty pictures to colleagues and stuff.
Well,
One of the rising stars, one we knew, at least I knew that when I was there.
yeah, well, there's,
mean, man,
you don't know the half of it.
A fly in the ointment of the apostle. Here was the guy that bringing it, and then something done like that.
Yeah, it's, yeah. I don't know what's up with the controller. It kind of skips a frame every once in a while. I had to fix it. All right, so we're going to go on to session 2, the eye, Paley's centerpiece. So we'll start with a question that we want to actually think about for a moment, not just answer automatically. What are you doing right now at this very instant without thinking about it at all? Well, you're doing probably a lot of things without thinking about it, but one of them is seeing. You're seeing. Light is entering your eyes from every direction in the room. Your lenses are bending that light, automatically adjusting their curvature for the distance to each object you look at, although some of us need extra help with that. The pupils of your eyes are managing the amount of light that enters, opening wider when you look toward dim areas. I'm not going to look into the audience at this point. Just kidding. Contracting when something bright catches your attention. Your retinas are covered with roughly 120 million rod cells and 6 million cone cells, converting that light into electrical signals. Those signals travel down your optic nerves to your visual cortex, which assembles them into a three-dimensional, color-corrected, continuously updated image of everything around you. And you haven't given it a single conscious thought. That's what Paley wants us to stop and actually think about tonight, because he believed, and I think he was right, that the human eye is one of the most powerful arguments for the existence of God that can be found anywhere in the natural world. And most of us walk around all day looking through this extraordinary instrument without ever stopping to marvel at it. Last week we established the logical framework. When we find complex, purposeful, precisely fitted structure, we are compelled to conclude there was a designer. Tonight, Paley takes that framework and applies it to his single greatest exhibit. He believed that even if every other example in the book of nature were set aside, the human eye alone would be enough to prove his case. So let's see why. No pun intended. Why the eye? Paley could have opened his biological argument with any organ in the human body. He chose the eye, and that choice was deliberate. First, the eye is the organ we most readily understand. We know what it's for. We know what happens when it fails. Everyone in this room has had the experience of needing glasses, or being in a room that was too dark to see well, or of staring into bright light and being temporarily blinded. We understand the eye's function intuitively, which means Paley doesn't have to spend a lot of time convincing us that the eye has a purpose. That much is obvious. Second, the eye is directly comparable to man-made instruments. Paley's readers in 1802 were familiar with telescopes and microscopes. Those instruments had lenses. They focused light. They produced magnified images. And everyone knew they had been designed by skilled craftsmen. Now, that's back before they had machines to do this, right? The eye does everything these instruments do and more. That parallel is the heart of Paley's argument. Third, and most importantly, the eye is staggeringly complex in exactly the ways that matter for the design argument. Its parts are fitted together with extraordinary precision. They serve a single clear purpose: vision. And removal or alteration of any significant part would defeat that purpose entirely. Precision, purpose, necessity. All three criteria are present in abundance. Paley opens his treatment of the eye with a direct comparison to a telescope. Here is how he frames it. I know no better method of introducing so large a subject than that of comparing a single thing with a single thing. An eye, for example, with a telescope. As far as the examination of the instrument goes, there is precisely the same proof that the eye was made for vision carefully. A telescope is built to gather light and focus it through a carefully ground lens to produce a clear image of distant objects. To build one that works, you need to understand optics. You need to calculate focal lengths. You need to grind lenses to precise curvatures. You need to position those lenses at exactly the right distance from each other. You get any of that wrong and you get blur, distortion, or nothing at all. A telescope that works is, by any measure, a designed instrument. Now consider the eye. The cornea at the front of the eye does about 70% of the focusing work, bending incoming light towards the lens. The lens, which sits just behind the pupil, does the fine adjustment. And here is where the eye does something that it is a tiny area called the fovea, and they detect color with remarkable precision. The signals from all these cells are partially processed in the retina itself before being transmitted to the brain. The eye is not just a camera, it's a camera with a built-in signal processor. All of this is packed into a sphere roughly an inch in diameter, self-cleaning, self-lubricating, protected by an automatic blink reflex, cushioned in a bony socket, and supplied with its own dedicated blood supply. Paley's question is simple. If a telescope, which does a fraction of what the eye does, requires a skilled designer, what does the eye require? There is, he says, precisely the same proof that the eye was made for vision as there is that the telescope was made for assisting it. In fact, the evidence is vastly stronger because the eye is vastly more sophisticated. Sorry, should have shown you that, I guess, or did it skip? The eye and the telescope. Goodness gracious. Now here's the claim. Yeah, here we go. Now here's the claim that I think is the most striking thing Paley says in all of natural theology. After walking through the design of the eye in careful detail, he makes this statement. Were there no example in the world of contrivance except that of the eye, it would be alone sufficient to support the conclusion which we draw from it as to the necessity of an intelligent creator. So let's read that again. He's not saying that the eye is one piece of evidence among many. He is saying it is by itself conclusive. Even if there were no other evidence anywhere in the universe, no other organ, no other creature, no other design structure anywhere in creation, the eye alone would be enough. I think I would agree with that. Of course, if there wasn't anything else, then who would be there to appreciate that there's an eye there? Anyway, that's a remarkable claim, and I think it deserves a moment's reflection because Paley is not given to exaggeration. He's a careful, logical writer. When he says the eye alone is sufficient, he means that. Why would he say that? Because the eye meets all three criteria of design: precision, purpose, necessity, with such overwhelming abundance that no serious alternative explanation is available. The eye is not just complex, it is complexly purposeful. Every single element of its design serves the function of vision. The cornea's curvature, the lens' elasticity, the iris's musculature, the retina's layered structure, the distribution of rod and cone cells, the routing of the optic nerve, all of it serves a single end, and all of it is fitted with extraordinary precision to serve that end. If you found a single object that exhibited that level of purposeful complexity and you genuinely could not explain it by any known natural process, what conclusion would you draw? Paley is saying you would conclude as inevitably as you would conclude that the watch had a maker, that this object had a maker. Now, everything else in natural theology, the ear, the skeleton, the circulatory system, the animal kingdom, the cosmos, is cumulative confirmation of what the eye already establishes. But Paley wants you to understand, even before he shows you all that additional evidence, the case is already made. The eye closes it. And I would say, it's kind of like the argument we make a lot of times, how many times does God have to tell you something in the Bible? How many times does a statement need to be made? Acts 2:38. How many more times does it need to be said before, okay, I'll believe it. It only has to be said once, and we ought to obey it. We ought to take it to heart. So again, this is the same thing. So this is something that's genuinely fascinating, and I think will strengthen your confidence in this argument rather than shake it. Charles Darwin knew Paley's argument about the eye. He knew it well. We saw last week that he practically had natural theology memorized. And when Darwin wrote The Origin of Species in 1859, he knew that the eye was his hardest problem. So here's what he actually wrote. To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. Of course, he went on to... But we'll notice that there is something about that sentence, and that is Darwin is not dismissing Paley's argument. He's agreeing with the observation that the eye's design appears on its face to be an overwhelming problem for any naturalistic explanation. He uses the word absurd. He says, I freely confess. This is not a man who thinks the eye is easily explained away. Darwin then went on to argue that natural selection could, in principle, produce the eye through a long series of small, gradual improvements, each of which provides a slight survival advantage. He proposed a sequence from a simple light-sensitive patch of cells all the way to the fully formed vertebrate eye. Now, there are serious scientific objections to that proposal that we won't go into fully tonight, but we want to make a more basic point. Notice that Darwin himself had to acknowledge that the eye, as it actually exists, presents an enormous difficulty for naturalistic explanation. And it's even more difficult now because we know so much more about the eye. All of those details that I've been spouting off, those are things that Darwin didn't know. Those are things. That's why there's a book called Darwin's Black Box, right? Darwin just hand-waved a lot of this stuff, It gets more and more complicated the further down you go. Ironically, that microscope that we're talking about gives us even more of a view into the miraculous nature of this world and the things that are in it. He didn't say it was quite easily explained. He said explaining it by natural selection seems absurd. He felt that burden keenly, and he spent a significant portion of the chapter, Difficulties of the Theory, wrestling with it. The eye remains one of the most debated examples in the origins discussion to this day. More than 160 years after Darwin, researchers have proposed various evolutionary pathways, but the debate continues, not because the science is settled in Darwin's favor, but because the complexity of the eye genuinely resists easy explanation. Paley's instinct was right. The eye is exactly the kind of thing that demands an explanation. Darwin agreed with that. They disagreed about what the explanation was, and that debate has never been fully resolved on the naturalistic side. The design explanation, meanwhile, has the significant advantage of actually accounting for what we observe, a system of extraordinary precision, purpose, and necessity doing exactly what it was made to do. Paley doesn't stop at the eye. He walks through the ear, not literally. He walks through the ear with the same careful attention. And I want to give you at least a brief picture of it because the ear, in some ways, is even more remarkable. The outer ear, the curved shape on the side of your head, is not decorative. Its curves are specifically shaped to gather sound waves and direct them toward the ear canal. Different shapes catch different sounds from different directions, giving us directional hearing. Those sound waves travel down the ear canal to the eardrum, a membrane roughly the size of a fingernail, stretched at precisely the right tension. It vibrates in response to pressure waves in the air. Behind the eardrum, 3 tiny bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, is that how you pronounce it? These are known also as the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. I should have led with that, I guess. The smallest bones in the human body, they transmit and amplify those vibrations. Their arrangement forms a lever system that increases the force of vibration as it passes from the large, flexible eardrum to the small, rigid, oval window of the cochlea. The cochlea is a fluid-filled spiral structure. Its inner surface is lined with thousands of hair cells, each one tuned to respond to a specific frequency of vibration. High frequencies trigger the cells at the base of the spiral. Low frequencies trigger the cells toward the apex. The result is that the cochlea performs a real-time frequency analysis of every sound you hear, breaking complex sounds down into their component tones and transmitting them as separate electrical signals to the auditory cortex of the brain. The brain assembles all of this into what you experience as hearing. Music, speech, laughter, thunder, the entire system from outer ear to auditory cortex is a precision instrument that no electronic audio system has matched in its full range of capabilities. Paley's point is simple. The ear, like the eye, could not have its function unless all of its parts were present and correctly arranged. The eardrum needs the hammer, anvil, and stirrup behind it. Those bones need the oval window of the cochlea to transmit to. The cochlea needs the hair cells to properly distribute along its spiral. Every part serves the whole. Every part is necessary. The design criteria are met at every level. And we have 2 of them, one on each side of our head, working together to give us stereo hearing and the ability to locate sounds in 3-dimensional space. The elegance of the system, its economy, and comprehensiveness is itself a mark of the designer's wisdom. Could you imagine the kinds of things that engineers have to do to get that sort of directionality? They'll have to put many microphones around the circumference of a dome in order to get it to pick up where the sounds are coming from. And this is all done. Now, they've figured out how to make algorithms to do that lately. But that just shows you how difficult it is, and that shows you the elegance and the complexity. And by the way, it just kind of struck me. So there are ears down there. So is that why when you get older, you get hard of hearing and you get hair in your ears? Is that like the hair escaping out of your ear or something? Is that what's happening? Anyway, I'm sorry.
I don't know, it's kind of eerie.
All right, so before we close with application, let's hear what the scripture says about the organs we've been studying tonight. The only organ that should be in the church building, by the way. Organ. Psalm 139:14. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. David wrote this thousands of years before anyone understood the biology of the eye, the mechanics of the ear. He didn't need that knowledge to reach this conclusion. He simply reflected on the reality of his own body, this extraordinary, intricate, capable thing that he lived in, and his response was worship. Fearfully and wonderfully made. That phrase, especially fearfully, captures something Paley's clinical analysis sometimes misses. There's something awe-inspiring, even a little overwhelming about the complexity of what we are. The right response is not just intellectual acknowledgement, it is praise. Proverbs 20 and verse 12. The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both. Solomon states it with characteristic directness. The ear and the eye have the same author. He didn't evolve them through blind natural processes. He made them both. And notice the implied argument. They're listed together not as natural features of anatomy, but as gifts, thing the Lord made and gave. That framing assumes purpose and intentionality, exactly what Paley argues from. Job 10 and verse 8, your hands have made me and fashioned me, an intricate unity. Job, in the middle of his suffering, remembers that God had made him, not as an afterthought, not as an accident, but with hands that fashioned him into an intricate unity. That phrase, intricate unity, is exactly what Paley demonstrates when he shows how the parts of the eye and ear are fitted together into a functioning whole. The interdependence Paley describes is the intricacy Job confesses. These passages are not incidental. They reflect a consistent biblical conviction that the human body is the work of a personal, intentional creator, and that the proper response to knowing this is not merely to nod our heads, but to worship. So tonight's study wasn't just biology, it was an argument for praise as well. And think about this too, and I know we don't like to think about such things. Whoops, this is the last one. This is kind of a short one, although we have more stuff to talk about. Imagine doing away with one of those. I mean, which one of your senses would you want to do without? I mean, I couldn't imagine that. You don't want to, what's that? Oh, your sense of smell? You'd want to do away with that? Well, I had to do without that. I'm sure some of y'all had to do without that with COVID, right? I mean, I lost my sense of smell during COVID for weeks. And it was miserable. It was absolutely miserable. I mean, you just don't realize.
My granddaughter, Madison, lost her sense of smell when she was very young. I didn't realize it. And a few weeks ago, she was back from college and had napped all day, as college kids do when they're at home.
Mm-hmm.
When Mackenzie got in from school, she was overwhelmed by propane gas all in the house.
Oh, no.
Madison didn't even smell it. The eye was left on the stove accidentally.
Oh, wow.
And a spark would have set it off, and Madison had no clue. So it's a pretty serious thing
Wow.
to lose that ability.
Wow. So that ended well.
Yeah, she came in and opened all the doors and windows and
Oh, wow.
aired it out. But
That's horrible. But that's exactly one of the dangers. And
They have those detectors. They have the monoxide detectors. I need to get those installed.
yeah, well, you know, that's why.
there was nothing burning at the time, so there's no
Yeah,
carbon
well,
monoxide.
I thought
It was just raw propane.
Oh, I thought it picked that up too. Or I think
I don't know if
device.
they
Maybe
might
that
make
is a
those.
different device.
I don't know.
I'll just go start throwing a match ahead of me before I walk into an empty room. No, that's probably not a good idea either. But again, I just remember back during that time thinking, this is bad, and I hated it because I had no idea if it was ever going to come back.
Did it affect your taste?
Oh yes, that's the problem. I would eat food and you couldn't taste it. I would eat peanut butter, anything. I would have to eat things that had a strong.
Remember how it tasted?
And you could. I mean, and they tasted wrong.
Yeah.
There was a time where things just tasted wrong, but it did eventually come back. But some people, you know, they say, "Oh, I never got it back," or "It took a long time." But and I thought during that period, I mean, this is just. I mean, just how fragile we are and how we take for granted all of these senses. And that's something to take away from this as well. You know, there are people I have, you know, Shane, you know, from work. You know, he has RP, which means that his field of view is slowly diminishing. And his ancestors, his father, I think, biological father, before he died, he barely had any vision. He had to have special glasses that would kind of fisheye lenses that would pull in just to the small, narrow field of view that he had in order to read. And so, he's all the time going to the doctor and getting checkups, and just pray for some technology or some new drug. Pray that his daughter doesn't have that disease as well.
We'll pray that he comes back to church too.
Yeah, I just think that it's one of those things that you can take these things for granted so easily. You just forget about the fact that you have these senses. They're just so second nature. So it's like any other thing that we have. We just take it for granted. Anyway, just add it to the long list of things that we should never stop praying. It would just be constantly, thank you, all the whole day long.
Did you say earlier this time we didn't have it as our purpose to delve into the deep biology and the type of responses evolutionists give there? Just so stories they tell about the development of the eye.
Mm-hmm. Go right ahead. We got 10 minutes.
Another session.
We got 10 minutes. We're going to go into the next session.
I just thought it was worth, if I'm not mistaken, worth pointing out. You talk about the developed vertebrate eye, but as a matter of fact, the octopus has the same eye as the human.
Mm-hmm.
If you're thinking about development from lower forms to higher, and that's completely defies explanation given.
Well, what about pigs? Their heart, don't they use heart valves from pigs? And
well, yeah, but a pig is a mammal.
Well, that's true.
But I mean, we're talking about
a fish. Yeah, a completely different branch of.
An octopus, and
yeah.
The eye of the octopus is basically the same as the human eye.
Mm-hmm.
The design has its tentacles all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say that I thought that it was pretty cool. This is decades ago. Obviously, we were having a Bible study, and one of the kids said, the teacher had said, well, if God designed all these things, why was there so many similarities? Because he was thinking the angle he had was, everything looks like it's similar to the last thing, and so therefore it all, it evolved. This has this in common with this thing, and the response was, and I always think of this when I get into this kind of discussion. I think about the response, and he said, well, why wouldn't God reuse the same designs? I mean, why would not God, why does everything have to be radically different from the next thing? You would think that there would be. And so you talk about your octopus. It's like, well, the octopus needs that same eye.
Creation perfectly explains that.
Mm-hmm.
But natural selection has a tough time with that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the Honda Prelude is a little different than the Honda Accord, but it's the same. You can clearly tell it's the same designer. And so just different models.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you fix a broken design that was perfect from the get-go? If you want to have different variety, fine, but you're not going to radically have a square-wheeled car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every other car has to be completely different, to the point where it's unrecognizable. Or it was kind of a silly argument. I think you can't say, oh well, these things are similar, and therefore it eliminates the need for God.
Well, that's one of the chief evolutionist arguments today, along with their icons, little pictures.
Uh-huh.
It's homology. They think that's the explanation. The only way to explain it is to assume evolution, that one form built upon an earlier, more primitive form, so-called.
So they never think of a common designer? Like you can tell the difference between the work of Mozart and Beethoven. I mean, they're all music, but I mean, you can tell they're distinct. They don't, every piece they put out relates somehow, or you can kind of tell the style, but it's the same thing. People do it. We're created by God. Of course he's going to use the same design over and over if it works.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy not to, I would think.
Well, the fact is that, God created planet Earth for us, and then he created us to exist on, thrive in planet Earth along with the other animals, and so, along with the animals, and then plants and whatnot. So, when you start out with a foundation, you're not going to have someone who Yes, sir.
Well, I was thinking that God, He doesn't do things illogical. I say this sometimes. I think I said this past week. And, God doesn't make a married bachelor. He doesn't do inconsistent nonsense. And logic is still true
Well,
for Him. I mean, He has to. When He created the world, He saw it was good, or it was very good, right? He didn't create chaos. He's certainly not the author of confusion. That's just
sure.
going through my head.
I mean, if it were possible to make a married bachelor, then we would live. That would be one of the laws of nature. It's just God created the laws of nature. He created all of these rules, and we obey them. And so yes, a contradiction is just going against nature. It's just something that is not according to the laws of nature. It's just something that cannot exist in nature because it is a contradiction in terms. It's like going back in time and killing your grandfather. It's a paradox. You can't have anyway, unless it's some weird Einstein relativity. Some what do they call that in the quantum realm, where the cat's alive and dead at the same time. I've heard people.
Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
Yeah, I've heard people actually. I think we actually are starting to come to more and more of a better understanding of the quantum world and what is happening down there, and it's not as weird as that. Of course, some people still want to make out like, well, the cat's alive or dead till you look at it. Well, that's because we live in a simulation, and the simulation doesn't have to figure out if it's alive or dead until you look at it, because it's like playing a game where, well, I'm on this part of the map and I'm seeing this part of the map, and they didn't have to compute all of the vertices and the images over there on that part of the map. Anyway, anything to get away from the idea of a creator. And so the more and more we get details about how just absolutely mind-blowingly detailed and impossible it would be for these structures to just appear out of nothing, the more people scrape and they claw for anything, just any kind of hope that there's not a God, because that's the only thing that they have to cling to. Rejecting God, they have to come up with some kind of some kind of a justification. But the funny thing about that is it doesn't matter, because no matter what kind of a theory you come up with, one day you're going to face the Creator, and then how are you going to explain that away? You're going to argue with God. Well, God, you don't exist, clearly. Why, Darwin knew that hundreds of years ago. Anyway. All right, so I guess I'll just mention this because I have uncharacteristically a few minutes to fill up. I kind of was doing this rapid. Sorry. I'm kind of pumped up, and it's not. I'm drinking decaf now, but I'm still kind of wired. 3 things for us to carry from tonight. First, the eye is Paley's centerpiece because it meets every criteria of design in overwhelming abundance, precision, purpose, and necessity. These all 3 are present at every level of the eye's structure, from the cornea to the optic nerve to the visual cortex. If the watch demanded a watchmaker, the eye demands far more loudly a designer. Second, the eye's complexity was acknowledged as a serious problem even by Darwin himself. And that's not the only problem, and they have lots of problems that they have to solve, as Philip mentioned, the octopus eye. And it's not a naive argument that only pre-scientific people found compelling. The most influential scientific naturalist of the modern era felt its force. When Darwin said explaining the eye by natural selection seems absurd in the highest degree, he was paying Paley the highest possible compliment. Third, the proper response to knowing we are fearfully and wonderfully made is praise. So again, this is a testimony that God wrote into the structure of our bodies, and it calls for a response. David's response was worship, and that's a good model. I mean, not worship of the man, but worship of God, because he created us. He gave us this life. He gave us these wonderful, he gave us the ability to, see the majesty of his creation, to hear the wonderful, sounds of the birds chirping in the forest, or the Mozarts or the Beethovens, and to taste all the wonderful animals that he made for us, and to feel the warm embrace of a loved one, and to smell that wonderful aroma of coffee as it's percolating. Anyway. All right, so next week, we move outward from the eye and ear to a larger mechanical system of the body, the skeleton, the musculature, and the circulatory system. We're going to see Paley in full analytical mode as he examines joints designed for specific ranges of motion, muscles that work in precisely coordinated opposing pairs, and a heart that beats 100,000 times a day for an entire lifetime without rest. That's amazing, isn't it? It's astounding. I mean, you don't get that kind of mileage out of a motor car, out of anything. But more than in any individual system, we're going to look at what Paley finds most compelling of all, the way that all these systems depend on each other absolutely. It's not enough to explain the heart by itself. You have to explain how the heart and the lungs and the blood vessels and the diaphragm all came together to work seamlessly. And that interdependence is, for Paley, the most powerful evidence of a superintending intelligence. And that gets into, of course, the Darwin's black box, the irreducible complexity arguments, right, of Behe. And I don't think that is that, I mean, you can tell me, you probably know more about that than I do. Has anyone assailed that successfully? I mean, I know that they've attempted the irreducible complexity argument.
I don't know that they've successfully assailed it, but when he first published, I think, for a long time there was silence in the scholarly journal world.
Mm-hmm.
One of his challenges was you don't find any kind of explanation at the detailed level of how some lower organ simpler function, actually what the pathways were that led to more complicated organs.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of these just so stories. Just bear with us. Just imagine it's always a thought experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this could have done this and that, but there's actually no hard data, no experimental evidence. He challenged them on that, and since then I think some have attempted it, but then they've been reviewed by other creationists, and they actually haven't pulled it off very well. They still are guilty of these just so stories, just with a lot of gaps and a lot of supposition and a lot of what ifs, and imagine that's all in it.
Mm-hmm.
So there were some, for example, one or two tried to find, dealing with this analogy about the mousetrap, the irreducible complexity, tried to say, well, you could take the platform of a mousetrap and use it to kill bugs or something. But his point was, but that's not what the mousetrap is designed to catch mice.
Yeah.
And if you were to remove any one, including the platform itself, none of the spring, nothing else would be attached. You can't remove any single piece where all had to come together simultaneously or be made together simultaneously for it to work. You can't remove any one and still have it to perform some function by itself. When somebody steps on a bug or hits a bug with any hard object, that's being killed by a person or something. But the thing itself is not going to automatically do it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, they've tried to assail his analogy, at the same time being distracted because they're not paying attention to his basic argument, which is biological.
Mm-hmm. And the other interesting thing about that, as you're saying that, is, okay, we've broken it down into the component parts. We've got the base, we've got the spring, we've got the little holder that holds the pin, the release mechanism, and anyway, we've got all these little parts, but even each part is shaped a certain way. Even each part has its peculiarities. The spring, I mean, what makes it a spring? It had to be coiled in a certain way, right? Has to have a certain sort of a design in order to catch and to be, connected to the other parts. And so you get to that same sort of argument, I think, here, where, okay, so you got an eye, but it's attached to something else. The eye just can't exist by itself. The eye has to have a system that is interdependent. And so it gets even more and more complex, and so it becomes that much harder to explain away. I mean, it's one thing to explain away a mousetrap that might have somehow, come into existence, but the eye, that's a really impossible sell. And then you say, okay, well, it's connected to a blood vessel that's getting blood. Well, where's the blood coming from? The heart. Okay. Well, where's the heart? Getting. So again, it's just one thing after another, But what about this? But what about this? And so you have to continually argue the entire system, and I think that just becomes exponentially more difficult.
Can you explain how there's a body in the universe that will support human life, and not only human life, all the other intricate details and beings and things that have been designed in order that man could live?
Mm-hmm.
There's no way.
Exactly. So the more and more you get down to it, there are so many interdependent things. And as you say, it's not just the human body, but it's the very planet that we walk on. What are we breathing? We're breathing oxygen. Well, where does that come from? Well, that comes from plants. Okay, well, now we got to get into plants. Well, what about the plants? And the plants, well, how does that get sustained? It is overwhelmingly complex. It's not just the mousetrap. It's the table that the mouse
doesn't come close to the natural one that God gave us, or the fact that I could get cut and just leave it cut, and I'll eventually just heal myself. Can you think of the new robots, the Tesla bots that are being built? They're pretty cool what they can do, but they don't heal themselves.
Yeah.
And that's, on our best day, we can't come close.
Well, yeah, but now, the Terminator
Right.
movies, anyway.
I was just going to add, I remember there was an author who challenged Behe's illustration of the bacterial flagellum,
Mm-hmm.
which is a propeller, basically, at the molecular level, and that's operated by actually a series of gears, an axle, as it were, and even an electrochemical motor. It's actually a motor. I mean, it's in every sense of how a motor works.
Yeah.
And Behe's pointed out in his writings that this has to be a case of irreducible complexity. You could not eliminate any one part and get functionality out of it. Well, there has been a rebuttal to that, attempted rebuttal,
Mm-hmm.
but he's also counterbutted that. Their attempted rebuttal was there are certain pieces to some bacteria that look like the outer shell of where the shaft is, where the flagellum comes out of the bacteria. The shell is similar in other species that don't have the flagellum. There's more like a jet propulsion engine.
Uh-huh.
So they say, so it could have started that way. But he went back to show, but the entire idea of the flagellum is totally different type of propulsion from squirting liquids out or anything like or a gas.
Yeah.
So I mean, the debate continues like that. They've attempted to sell it, but I don't think anybody's really come up with a convincing rebuttal.
Yeah. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I have heard of at least one where they tried to explain it away, and it wasn't even worth remembering, quite frankly. I mean, I try to remember the good arguments to, try to combat them, but it just was kind of nonsensical. It was another one of those, well, you can smash something with the board kind of arguments.
Yeah,
But,
his point, B's response was, even though there may be similarities in some of the outer structure of the two devices that protrude through the membrane of the cell,
Yeah.
they serve totally different purposes. There's no way you can show how the jet propulsion could have evolved in step by step into the flagellum propulsion,
Yeah.
or vice versa either.
Yeah. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. And of course, in all of this, you have certain creatures that can procreate. I mean, they just split cells and they make more of themselves, but there are plenty more that it takes two, and just because you get one, evolution pops one into existence one day. You'd have to again, it's exponentially more difficult to explain these things. the more and more detail, the more resolution and clarity we get on how we're made, the more you have to agree with David that we are wonderfully and fearfully made. Well, I won't hold you anymore. Let me hit the stop button.